Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Darlene Livingston, and I'm on the IFTN board and also Executive Director of Pennsylvania FarmLink. I would like to invite everyone today and thank Heather Gessner for her work and help on this, and also, most of all, our speaker, Dave Goeller. Dave is recently retired from the University of Nebraska, where he was the Deputy Director of the North Central Risk Management Education Center. Also, he was a farm transition specialist, and that's where I met him several years ago through an IFTN conference, and just really appreciate all the knowledge I've gained from Dave. And I can tell you he's one of the leading experts in sweat equity and all the type information he will share today. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Thank you very much, Dave, for joining us, and I appreciate your expertise today.
Okay, thanks, Darlene. Am I coming through loud and clear? Okay, great.
Yes.
Well, thanks again for this opportunity to speak with you. Darlene asked me to think about this concept of sweat equity. And as I thought about it, I broadened that topic a bit and thought about, the only time sweat equity really matters, as I think it through, is if we're looking at some sort of a family business situation. And so I went ahead and addressed it from a little broader perspective. As Darlene said, I'm a retired ag economist, also retired. If you can see that picture of a combine up in front, that's myself driving my combine. If you have really good eyes, you can see my grandson sitting beside me on the jump seat, but it's pretty hard to see from this perspective. But I retired about 10 years ago from farming, and we do not have a family business that's going to succeed beyond my generation. I have 3 kids. My son's an engineer, a daughter's an engineer, and the other one married an attorney, and I don't have any farmers. My brother farmed with me. He's not married. We have no nieces and nephews involved. So we found 2 neighbor boys that have taken over. They will be our successors. They will not be owning our business, but they will be operating it into the future. So I guess my perspective is not just from an academic one, but also from a real life one, because we had to look at many of these same issues as well. One of the other things that I have done in my retirement is I continue to volunteer for the Nebraska Farm Hotline. And this has been something that's been really heavily used earlier in 2021. Before the grain prices started to recover last fall, we had an awful lot of calls. So I've been working a lot with folks trying to decide what they're going to do, what financial situations and so on. So that's a little bit about my background. One thing we will be talking about a bit today, probably some of them have legal implications and tax implications. My advice is don't take information from an economist and apply it to a legal situation. So I'm not an attorney and I'm not an accountant. So get that kind of information as well. Don't take my word as the last one. And a lot of things vary from state to state as well. So, but we won't be talking about that too much, I hope. One thing I do feel like I have some expertise in, and that's working with families. I've had the opportunity to work with literally thousands of people all across the United States, even up into Canada, working with this business succession, even some estate planning work, some of that kind of thing. So I have had a chance to work with a lot of different folks. And I'm just going to share with you a little bit about kind of my system, if you will. When I meet with someone, the first thing I always will do is I'll introduce them to who I am. My name's Dave Goeller. I'm a retired economist. What I'm trying to do is kind of get them some confidence and that I might know what I'm talking about, at least a little bit of a background on who I am so they feel a little more comfortable. I always like to share what my objectives are, and one of my objectives is not to sell anything. The they're going to be a lot of our folks. There's several attorneys that are going around selling estate plans and stuff. We do a series of workshops also, and you know, that's one thing that just kind of aggravates me, that you know, there's nothing I'm selling. There's not anything I'm trying to tell folks what to do. I'm not trying to give them advice. What I'm trying to do is simply to help them organize their thoughts and help them think about what's really important to them. And what's important to them is going to drive this decision. And that makes a lot of difference as far as I'm concerned. I like to start out when I've gone through that introduction objectives just with a question, and that is, how can I help you, or what can I do for you? And then I just shut up and wait. See what they say. Most of the time, my experience is what they tell you up front is not what the real situation is about. And they'll get there eventually, but a lot of times, it has very little to do with what they say up front. But it's always important, I think, to get them started talking, and so getting them feeling comfortable. And the other thing that I'll share with you that I think is really a great skill, and that is asking good questions. If you can develop a series of questions that you ask, I used to, when I was first starting this job, I had a whole page of questions I wrote down that I could apply in different situations. And by asking the question, a lot of times you can steer the conversation in a direction that gets to be productive. I find that telling is not a good way to do things. Telling folks what to do very seldom, in my experience, is successful. Usually what I think the outcome usually ends up with is, well, you know, I never really did think that was a good idea. That was this guy's idea. That was his opinion. That wasn't my opinion. Usually it doesn't lead to good results. So do an introduction, tell them what your objectives are, ask the question, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And then use your good questioning as you go into for the future. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a family I worked with 20 plus years ago now. And I got a call at the university on my office, and it was a gentleman, a 68-year-old rancher from Western Nebraska. And he said, Dave, I saw you at a seminar that you did, and I really could use some help. We need some help transitioning our business down to the next generation. I said, well, tell me about your business. And he says, well, it's a 10,000 acre ranch, which is kind of modest size in Western Nebraska. It might sound large. It would be big in the Eastern Nebraska, but 10,000 ranch is pretty good size, but it's not huge. And he said, you know, what I'm trying to figure out is, you know, I started working on this ranch when I was 18 years old. I got out of high school and I started working there. And my dad paid me a little bit less than minimum wage, but, you know, I really didn't need the money. And he always told me that, you know, someday that I would have a shot at this ranch, that this thing would someday, could someday easily be mine. When I got married, they increased my wages. I got a house to live in and a half a beef a year, and still the same wages, he says. But, you know, that was kind of how I started, and I've been doing this ever since. And I said, well, so what is it that you want to do? He says, well, I want you to come out and let's go through some things so I can figure out how to transition this thing. So I got directions, got his place figured out. He said, oh, by the way, he says, when you pull in, he said, beep the horn a couple times. He says, I'll come out. He says, we have some rattlesnakes live under our front porch. And he says, and I'd hate for you to have a surprise walking in, which I appreciated, by the way. So I got there and I beeped the horn, but the rattlesnakes weren't there. Walked on in, started talking and went through some things. I said, so tell me more about your business. And he did. He told me about the cattle that they raised and how they market and so forth and so on. And then I finally said, well, so tell me, how old is your son? He says, well, my son's 38, he says. But I wasn't really asking about me and my son. I was asking about me and my dad. and his dad was 92 years old. And the son, the 68-year-old son, and the grandson, the 38-year-old, every morning would get in the pickup and they would drive over to dad's, and they would wait till he got out of breakfast, and he would come out and say, okay, you go rake the hay and you go feed the cow. He had total control of that business. He did all of the buying, did all of the selling, did all the financials, wrote all the paperwork, did all the checks. He had the checkbook, and he had everything. Well, we talked a bit more, and one of the things I always like to do is to leave them with a to-do list, so we can progress down the road and a date when we're going to check in again. And on this to-do list, the first thing I had at the top of the to-do list was, do you know what your dad's estate plan is? Do you know how things are set up? Do you know the way things are? And he said, well, all I really know is that someday, son, this has got a shot to be mine. He says, well, find out what that means, because that's probably not good enough. And I had a couple other things on there, and I went down the road. I got a call about 3 months later, and he had a chance to visit with his dad. He found it really difficult to have that conversation. Really never asked the question and never found out. I got a call another 2 months later, and dad just died. And he now knows what the estate plan is. The estate plan is that he shares everything equally with his 7 brothers and sisters. This man had worked 50 years of his life devoted to this business. When Darlene mentioned the word sweat equity, I hate to guess what the sweat equity was. A huge amount of sweat equity in this business. And he was going to receive exactly what the other heirs were going to receive. One thing I should mention, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and do the chat. Darlene will take those in, and then we'll have a break after just a bit, and we might go through some of those if we have a chance. Some concepts I want to talk about that I think have helped me think things through. The first one is what I call the golden rule. And I believe in the golden rule as it is in the good book, do unto others. But I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the person with the goal gets to make the rule. The 92-year-old grandfather, in this case, has all the gold. And he's the one, ultimately, that makes the rules. It doesn't mean that the younger generation has no ability to negotiate or no power whatsoever. They do. In fact, maybe more power than the older generation, simply because they don't have to agree to do anything if they don't want to. But the person with the gold is ultimately the one that's going to decide. Another concept I think has helped me explain this situation a lot is this idea of, if one person is contributing differently to the business than others, should they somehow be compensated? So should contribution equal compensation? That's a question. Again, I go back, the golden rule trumps all. And if people with the gold say no, they'll get whatever I dang well please. Well, okay, that's it. That's what it's going to be. But know that before you spend 50 years of your life trying to chase this wild dream of a ranch. So contribution compensation. The rest of that story is the 92-year-old father, as I said, died. Everything got split up 8 ways. What do you think the odds are that, as my 68-year-old rancher went into all the lenders he could think of to borrow 7/8 of the value of that ranch, that he was able to attain financing somehow? First of all, he couldn't get financing. Lenders do not make 7/8 loans on the loan to value. Secondly, his cash flow wouldn't even come close. A couple of his sisters felt kind of bad about the ranch, going to be leaving the family, because what happened was the family decided to sell it, and that ranch was sold. It's not in the family anymore. big landowner in Western Nebraska, added it to his larger ranch. Not Ted Turner, he's our biggest one, but it's another big one. I won't mention the name. But that ranch now is out of the family. It's owned by someone else. And I don't think it's what the 92-year-old grandfather wanted to see happen. But what I think happened is they likely went into a well-meaning attorney and probably said something like, we need an estate plan. And the attorney says, so what do you want? And the guy says, well, I don't know. What do you recommend? And maybe the attorney said something like, well, we could split things equally. How does that sound? And if that's likely what happened, there you go. Down the road, they have that land is no longer in the family. That business is non-existent. Assets are gone. That particular 68-year-old man, his wife ended up with health issues. They spent most of the ranch in the value he got from the ranch. Most of that went into long-term care, nursing home. Last I heard, he's living in a federally subsidized house in a small town in Western Nebraska. I don't think that's what his parents wanted. I don't think that's what they intended, but without having a plan, that's what they got. Contribution compensation. Let me put some numbers to this. I'm a numbers guy. So let's take an example. Let's say in 1990, mom and dad, and I'm going to talk about mom and dad being the owners of the business, and I'm going to talk about son. In this case, it could just as well be daughter, but son being the one that wants to be the heir of the business. So in 1990, mom and dad have a net worth of $300,000. They have 3 kids, and if their plan that they like, picking the golden rule, was to split things equally, then each one of the children would have an inheritance of $100,000 if that would have happened in 1990. Here we are in 2022, and that net worth, everything they own minus everything they owe, the net worth of the business was $3,300,000. And I would again agree that if all the kids had contributed equally, or if contributions had been compensated to the one that contributed more, that it should be split equal. If it was split equal, that would be $1,100,000. But thinking about this contribution compensation concept, and when the parents in my example sat down and they thought about all the things that they contributed to the business and all the things that their son contributed to the business, they decided that, our growth and appreciation, our increase in value from $300,000 to $3.3 million, that our partner, our son in this case, was at least responsible for half of that growth. And we were probably responsible for the other half. So how that works out in numbers, if that was the case, was this $3 million would be split 50-50 and $1.5 million each. And that works out, the partner's share would then become, he would have $100,000 because he's one of these 3 kids up here in the 1990. He would have $1.5 million because he's 50-50 share of the growth and appreciation. And he would also have $500,000 because he's one of the 3 children that are sharing the founder's $1.5 million. So that would make an inheritance for him of $2.1 million for the partner and $600,000 for each sibling. Let's take that same example and come up with a little different equation on it. Let's say that everything was identical up to here, but now instead of 50-50, the people with the gold thought it was about a 10%, 90%. And I'll tell you, this is not hard and fast numbers. This is ballpark numbers. But going back in time, as I sit down with people and say, well, how much time do you think he contributed in 1980 or in 1990 or in 2000? As you go back in time, it's almost impossible to get hard numbers on this. But if they said, okay, now I think the partner, the younger party, put in 10%, mom and dad are 90%, it would break down like this. It breaks down with partner gets $100,000 because they still have $100,000 of the first three. They would have $300,000 because of the growth and appreciation of the business, which is 10% of the $3 million. And they would have $900,000 because they have 1/3 of the 2.7. So that split is $1.3 million for the partner, $1 million each for each of the siblings. If we were sitting in person right now, I would ask to see a show of hands. How many people think that's fair? How many people think that thinking about contribution and compensation is fair? It's not equal. It is definitely not equal. I think that as I work with farmers and ranchers, agricultural production people around the country, the concept of this seems to make sense to a lot of them, though. One other concept I'm going to throw out here is, so let's say that Jimmy back in 2000 or whatever, back in the future sometime, was contributing, and we know exactly what those numbers are. We're pretty comfortable what those numbers are. Should there be an interest applied to that? Those of you that have the same color hair I do remember the 80s. Interest rates were in the 20s in the 80s in the Midwest. I think they probably were where you guys are too. Interest rates now are in that 3 to 5% range. But if you throw an interest rate into that, it makes a whole lot different value on what that contribution might have been. I have a little example here. If you just go back to the year 2000, and you looked at, let's say he or she were putting in 30 hours per week for about 50 weeks. And if they thought that their labor was worth $4 an hour, that'd be a contribution of $6,000. If we considered 5% to be fair, and I think the average from 72 to 2021 is about 5.5%, but that's an average. That's not a weighted average. If you weight the average back earlier, those higher interest rates distort that quite significantly. But if you figure at 5%, how much has that contribution been worth? You probably have heard the rule of 72. The rule of 72 basically is you divide the interest rate into the number 72, and that's how many years it takes that $6,000 to double. So 5% into 72 is about 14 years. So in 14 years, it's going to be 12,000. I have a little spreadsheet. Darlene has copies of the spreadsheet and another one that I use occasionally that looks at the difference between management hours and labor hours and tries to have a calculation on that as well. But this is just simply a time value on that $6,000. And we looked at $6,000 at 5%, and we look at 14 and a little over 14 years. That $6,000 has now doubled to about 14, about 12 in here. So there we go. The other part I was going to say is this other spreadsheet. Also, if it was $6,000 a year that he contributed, plus the 5% interest, you can see in 20 years, we're up here to $208,000. Now these pictures are covering up the rest of the data, but that's a significant amount. So it does matter on this sweat equity whether or not we're applying interest. Those spreadsheets, there aren't any protected cells. So if you want a copy of these, you can ask me or you can ask Darlene for them. Texting me or emailing me is a great way to get a hold of me. Darlene also. But I'll warn you that there's no protected cells. So if you type a number in here, it'll wipe out the formula. So save a clean copy so you can always get back to it. But these have been useful. I will warn you, you're not going to get down to the penny. What they're going to help you do is to get a round number estimate. I would say within maybe 10 grand, 20 grand. They're not accurate to the penny. There's no way to go back and say how many hours you worked in 2000 or how many hours you put in 1980. There's just no way to do that accurately. There's neither is there an absolute way to go back and say, well, labor was worth. Now we can go back and see what minimum wage was because there's data on that, but it's pretty hard to go back and say, now what was agricultural help worth or what was this help worth? So there's a lot of guesswork, a lot of what I would call Kentucky windage in this. So I don't think it's real accurate because it isn't, but it'll help you get a handle on really what's out there. And a lot of times when you put interest in it, it really is a surprising number that you come up with. So contribution compensation. What do you think? Is that something that makes sense? I think in my own mind that it's the best way to compensate people is to just pay them. Pay them when they do it. Pay them when they're there. If they do hourly work, pay them by the hour, so many hours a month, just pay them. There's tax consequences to that. You know, the other way to compensate them is this method that the family I mentioned, this someday son deal, where, you know, it's a pie in the sky promise. I think it's probably a good deal for the older generation. I don't think it's a very good deal for the younger generation. And the third way to compensate is to try to do it through the estate plan. But talking about the estate plan with the older generation is, you know, it's a bit of a challenge. It's hard to bring up that topic and it's hard to bring up the conversation. One thing I will say is sometimes the most unfair thing you can do is to treat everybody equally, all your heirs equally. And that is an opinion. You may not share that, but that's an opinion.
Dave, we have a question or comment in the chat. Did you want me to share that now?
Sure.
From Sharon, these succession problems also arise because family dynamics are avoidant of conflict, of death, of decisions, don't resolve on their own, and people confuse fair, equitable with equal. How can we support a push towards more conversation on and a broader sense of fair?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about conversations a little bit, but you know, one of the things that I've tried to do is to encourage them to do business meetings, and at least you have a chance. And I guess I can share with my own situation. My brother and I operated together. We had one entity that we worked together with all the time, and we had monthly meetings. And the mechanism that we had to do to force me to even do monthly meetings was that we had to sign the checks. And we made both of us have to sign the checks, so we both had to do it. But when we were there signing checks, we were also talking about what are we planning in the future, what's coming up, what's going on, what are the long range things, those kind of situations. The part of that I always feel is hard to communicate is, you know, that everybody thinks that this kind of stuff is important, but very rarely is it urgent. And it becomes urgent when the doctor says somebody's got 4 months to live, then it gets urgent. But very rarely is it urgent. So it gets put off, and it gets put off down the road. And there needs to be some sort of a structure, I think, whether it's meetings or whether it's get-togethers or something to be able to talk about it. And this idea of fair is a lot like beautiful. It depends. It's in the eye of the beholder. One person thinks it's perfectly fair and the other person thinks not fair at all. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. But okay, let's move on. Concepts. One other concept I think that makes sense for families is that what I call the unrelated rule. And that is that if the relationship and the arrangement is something that you would consider doing with an unrelated party, it's probably not too far off. What happens, you know, I'm not saying that it's bad to give your kids a sweetheart deal and maybe even pay them more than they're worth. But the danger of that is on the flip side, and that is that then they begin to expect a sweetheart deal all the time, and they may well not have that opportunity down the road. It may not be such thing. So this unrelated rule is something that I've worked with folks, and they felt that was valuable as well. Okay, the process. One of the key questions I like to ask them is, do you want your business to continue beyond your lifetime? This is a different question than what we've been talking about so far. Well, if the business is going to continue on, that means that we need to have some parts of the business. We need to be able to accomplish the labor. We need to look at the income. We need to have the management. We need to look at the assets. So when we're looking at the business continuing on, we need to think about how this labor is going to transfer. Usually this is not very hard for people to come up with. There's so much physical work that needs to be done. Most people are aware of what that is. When it moves from one generation to the next, that labor has to be accounted for. And that's usually the easiest thing to do. The income is not extremely hard, but the income part of things, if you're looking at bringing another generation into the business, and now we're going to have family living expenses for two rather than one, we need to make sure that we've got a feasible plan. We need to make sure that there's enough income coming in. And the real question that arises is, what does retirement look like? Because if retirement looks like I'm going to sit inside and watch Oprah and drink Diet Coke, that's one thing. If retirement is I'm going to travel the world and see every port and fly wherever I want to go, that's another. So the feasibility part of this, becomes really important. And the income may or may not be there. I know it's going to probably take more money from the business if we have to provide for a retirement as well. Many farm families, in my experience, don't have an IRA or a 401k or any off our farm retirement. Some do, especially if they worked off the farm, but many don't. So this feasibility becomes important to the business transfer. Management, this is the hardest thing to pass on to the next generation, I think. Especially, I think there's a gender difference here. I think especially for men, a lot of who we are and a lot of our identity, a lot of self-respect, whatever, a lot of pride, if you will, is in I built this farm, or I built this ranch, or I've been successful, I've done this. And now we're asking him or even her in some cases to pass this on down and to give up the control. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do. But I'll also tell you, without good management, it's not going to be successful. It has to be managed. I think most of you can think of examples. I can think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head within 10 miles of where I'm sitting, where the next generation inherited a huge amount of money, an operation, a business worth millions. They no longer own it. They've lost it all. And in just a matter of a few years in some cases. So management's really important. I think of management as a skill. You can think of it like free throws, if you will. Everybody can shoot free throws, but some are innately better at it than others. I think most of us can improve by shooting free throws by practicing. I think we can do the same with management. And swimming, I like the analogy of swimming too. If you just said, well, I'm going to throw you in the deep end of the pool, but you've never had a chance to get in the shallow end of the pool. You've never learned to doggy paddle. You've never learned to float. You've never learned to swim at all. If we could mentor or coach or teach folks in that shallow end of the pool before we throw them in the deep end of the pool, I think we've increased their chance of success by multiples. So I really encourage people to consider that when they're looking at bringing in a successor to their business. Management is really important. And the last thing, of course, is the assets. And I call that the estate planning. How are we going to transfer those assets? It's what do you own? What do you rent? What do you control? And what are the liabilities associated with it? So those are the parts of the business that I think are important. Do you want your business to continue beyond your lifetime? This is a kind of a schematic that I have put together. Actually, I stole this from somebody over in Iowa. It wasn't John Baker, but it was one of his colleagues. And then I elaborated a little. So we have the farm in the middle. And if the person that I asked, do you want your business to continue, says no, then we have a pretty simple task. We have a group of assets, and we need to come down here and come up with an estate plan that says who gets what, when do they get it, and how are we going to transfer it. If we have someone that says we want a business to continue, then I believe that we start off with, well, the numbers guy, I usually start off with financial viability of it. But I think it's probably a better or more sound way to go with the goals of the people that are going to be involved with it. And this is going to help to establish some communication. But the goals are really important about the goals of the different generations, the goals of the people going to be involved in the business. I have some goals and material that I've used. Paul Gesselman put it together about in '82, I think. So it's been around for a long time. But I have everybody that's involved in the business take this goals material, and they each work on it individually, and then they come back together and they talk about what their results were. And it's been a really good tool to get communication going. So let's talk a bit more about goals. So the goals, I think the older generation is likely going to have different goals. You think about it. I know my goals at 70 years old are different than mine were at 50 or at 40 or 20. You know, I mentioned this lifestyle. Where's the money going to come from? Where are you going to live? What's important for this fair versus equal, contribution and compensation. The younger generation, again, lifestyle. I think lifestyles have changed. I'm not sure I don't have any statistics to document it. I just see my own kids, and their lifestyle at 30 years old was a whole lot different than my lifestyle at 30 years old. Their expectations are higher than mine were. And that's great. That just means that things from a society are maybe improving. I don't know. But they have a different expectation towards lifestyle. And sometimes the older generation don't agree with that very well. I think it's too high. Usually the younger generation has a different idea on how the business should grow, how quickly the business should grow, whether or not there should be debt. I think the debt is much more comfortable with younger folks than it is with older folks. And that makes sense too, because there's theoretically more time to pay it off. Owning and renting usually a different in attitude. Family time and work time. I think my son's idea of family time is that they fly down to Texas and they go on a cruise. That's family time. My dad's idea of family time was everybody goes out and we bale hay together, and somewhere in between is kind of where I lie. But this whole idea of what's work and what's family time, there's a lot of differences. And I see a lot of families kind of struggle over working through some of those things. Communication is huge. It was brought up in that little text question about the business. The family needs to figure out how to talk this through. I can't force families to communicate. What I've tried to do is I always have a to-do list that they need to finish before they call me back. If they haven't finished the to-do list, I'll always ask them when they call, well, how's the to-do list coming? Well, we're pretty well done with it. Okay, well, then let's talk. If they aren't done with it, I said, let's finish up the to-do list and then call me later. But one of the things on that is usually something to do with communication. And it's extremely important. I love to have some sort of a business meeting scheduled on that to-do list. A lot of times if we're going to do a meeting. We'll set a date on that to-do list. We'll set a brief agenda, 3 or 4 topics on the agenda, and try to start them down that road. Expectations. What happens with families is there's 2 things that happen. People have expectations, and they're usually not the same. And people get really upset if they think somebody else is hiding the ball on them. So you need to be upfront. Things need to be out in the open. And these expectations are just another word for goals. If we know what those goals are, I think we can tend to have a better chance of meeting them. Excuse me. We need to do business meetings. I think that's the way I'm wired. We need to talk about what was said at the meetings, and then we need to write it down so that what I think you said is what you think I heard. We need to share them with, especially with people that aren't involved in the business. Surprises cause problems. Goals. The finances, that's pretty self-explanatory, but I a lot of times like to look at the trend sheets. I'm a numbers guy. This is a lot of times we'll start with this stuff. Trend sheets, ratio analysis, what's the working capital, how's the debt structured, what's the interest rate, blah, blah, blah. The financials make a difference. If the financials don't work, the business isn't going to work. That's all there is to it. Family living costs are where a lot of the profit goes. Family living costs and growth of your business, that's basically where profit goes. And the living goes as to who's going to pay what, has to come out of the family living. That goes here. Off-farm employment, if there's a job, of course, that helps. And there sometimes are jobs. The younger generation is going to need not necessarily ownership of all the assets, but they're going to need at least access and control of the assets. And I've helped people put together a few LLCs that don't necessarily put all the ownership in the younger generation's hands, but they do have access and control of it. There needs to be adequate size, the cash flow, and I'm a records guy. I hate doing records myself. That's why I married an accountant and a math major. But without good records, I don't know how you can make good management decisions. How can you manage it if you can't measure it? The succession plan, retirement plan, and estate plan, they need to work together. And the thing that moves through all of these, at least these first 2, are this idea of management. Management, the 3 most important factors in a successful business. I just really believe that that's true. I have a guy that I think about when we talk about management. We were doing a seminar in Puerto Rico about 7, 8 years ago. And there was a gentleman there at that seminar who owned the largest import-export business in all of Puerto Rico. Most of what came in and left Puerto Rico went through his shop. And I asked him in front of the audience, I said, so what do you think about management? Are you going to pass the management of your business on down to your kids, or how are you going to do things? What are you thinking? And he said to me, and he shared a concept that I hadn't really thought about. He said, so what do you think the odds in the genetic lottery are that all the possible gene combinations between me and my wife that we're going to come up, we have 2 kids, that one of those 2 kids is going to have the proper genes, the proper genetics to make the management decision of this multi-million-dollar business successful? And I hadn't really thought of that. He says, what we're going to do is we're hiring the management. Now, the kids are going to own the business. They're going to have a large part of the business someday when we're gone. But the management, we'll be hiring the management. And, I think that concept could apply in some asset ownership in farms and ranches as well. But most of the time we think about the manager, the owner, operator, manager of the business. And, that might be a concept to at least consider. I just throw that out for what it's worth. So, you want your business to continue? Yes or no? If you do, how long do you want that management period to last? And so by that, what I mean is, so we have the owner that has been managing the business. And then we're going to have the successor that's going to be managing in the future. Do we want to have a short period of time, or do we want a longer period of time? Really what I'm asking folks to do is give me a target date out here of when this gentleman or lady is going to retire. Because what we're really looking at, it's kind of like running a relay race in track. We've got a person here that's been carrying the baton of management, making the decisions for the business. And somewhere in here, there's going to be an exchange so that the owner that had the baton is going to give it to the successor that now is going to carry the baton on in the future. And so what we need to do is we need to set a target date of when that's going to occur. And what I like to think about, it's a little bit, if you want to have an example of how things are happening on the farm. If dad's going into town to see the bank, he needs to get in the pickup, but he also needs to get his successor in the pickup with him. And they need to go in to town together to see the bank. Dad's going to make the decisions, but on the way home, he needs to explain, this is why we did what we did. This is why we made the loan like we did. In the second set of, maybe it's a 15-year transition plan. The first 5 years would be step number one. The second 5 years would be step number two. And that would be the owner and the successor are going to have a meeting at home, make the decision of what they want to do, then go in together and present the plan to the lender. On that last step, that last 5 years out of the 15, the successor is going to be making the decision and telling dad what they did, but he's going to be there. And the number four, the son will be driving the pickup. So it just kind of transitions through. But it allows for mentoring and coaching and teaching. And I think that's been pretty successful with a lot of families as I've worked with. So retirement. You're going to retire or know it. The golden rule, it's your stuff. If you're going to retire, give me a target date so that we can start this transition of management. Where are you going to live? What are you going to do? What are your interests? What does retirement look like? When I'm doing a workshop or a seminar, I'll hand out blank pieces of paper and a pencil and ask, draw me a picture of what retirement looks like for you. Have everybody in their family do that. And then let's look at that. Now explain to your family, tell your family what you drew and why you drew it, what you have there, what retirement looks like. Everyone in the family does it. That's been really, I've liked that work. It has generated some really good discussion, I think. Retirement quiz, again, how much you're going to spend? Where's the money going to come from? It comes from about 3 sources. Rental is one, Social Security or other retirement investments, or the sale of assets. If you know how much you're going to need, we can pretty well look at where it's going to come from, and we can get a pretty good handle on how long it's going to last. But we got to start with, what's it going to be? How much is it going to be? All kinds of sources. I really like this statement. It's kind of something that I had on my wall for a long time. I took it down now because I retired. But don't retire from something, retire to something. What I retired to is volunteering, working with the hotline, working more with my church, seeing a lot of my grandkids. We were at one of my 7-year-old granddaughter's basketball game Sunday. You know, some of those kinds of things wouldn't have been possible while I was working. That was a fun game. They are figuring out that you do need to bounce the ball when you're running instead of just traveling all over, but it's kind of fun to watch. The last part on the plan, last plan we need to think about is the estate plan. And I'm going to wrap up with this. You know, really an estate plan is just an asset transfer plan. And the biggest question is who gets what. You don't have to be an attorney to help people think about who should get what. It's probably the hardest question, and I get back to that urgent and important. This is the one that needs to be worked through. What transfer vehicle? What I'm saying there is, do we want to use a will or a trust? Do we want to use titling? Do we want to use gifting? How do we want to transfer these assets from one generation to the next? And the last one is, when's it going to happen? I mean, those are the decisions that have to be made, the big picture decisions that have to be made. I think many of us are capable of helping talk through the who gets what. The different vehicles, you know, that's an attorney question. Even the when is probably an attorney question. But those are some of the ways I like to think about it. So my last slide is, a business can pass from one generation to the next without planning. You want to improve the odds, make a plan. I'll just go through this. This is something that I live by. This is a little time management matrix. And you'll see that across the top are urgent and not urgent, and important going right and left, and not important. And so in the category 4, activities, things that are not urgent and not important, things that are time wasters or busy work, you know, things like that for me would be watching TV, playing video games, that kind of stuff. Things that fit in the urgent but not important would be my cell phone. My cell phone rings, I answered every time. Just before we took the call, I had a robocall. You know, most of those things aren't important. These things that are urgent and important, crisis, deadline projects, things I'm trying to get moved into this category by setting a to-do date. You know, things like the state patrol's calling at 3 in the morning, there's 20 head of cattle with your brand on running down the interstate. Urgent and important. We get those done. We get that done. The things that we've been talking about all morning are not urgent. Almost everybody thinks they're important. This planning, this working on relationships, communication, not urgent. I think that's why it's so hard to get things done.